across the country. And so this family's goal was realized, and I wanted to thank that organization for doing what they do and for helping us out. And it's also a good reminder, I think, for us as providers that there are other options for donation if patients don't qualify for transplantation, and the CDT was really helpful with that. And I especially want to thank Mike Thibault and Bob Opel from the CDT, who worked really hard with us and were so kind as to donate all of the labor costs associated with this case to our department with the idea that we would have a palliative care conference. So this has been in the works for a while, and Dr. Barnard has helped us sort of think through, and the palliative care team has helped us sort of think through what would be the most impactful way we could talk about palliative care that would really help our community, both inpatient and outpatient providers. So Dr. Barnard's going to introduce our speakers for today.
Thank you. So I think all of us who care for children that are critically ill or have life-threatening illness understand the challenges of doing so and the incredible need for not only strong collaboration, but really open and honest communication. And I know in my work with the palliative care team, we've really had the opportunity to meet some amazing families, one of whom is with us today. Sarah Casey is here, and Steve Shaw, they're Emerson's parents, and we were blessed to have a chance to work with them, and also through them met Blyth Lord from the Courageous Parents Network, and they're going to share with us today stories to help really demonstrate the importance and the power of open and honest communication and having a plan. So without further ado.
Thank you, Diana. Hello, everyone. I'm going to hopefully thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm based in Boston, but my family has a house. My parents, my grandparents. I've grown up coming to Vermont with my grandparents' house in Lincoln. So it's a particular honor for me to be here here talking to you. I have to say, it really is. I should say. So, what is the advance? Does it just? Oh, here we go. It's a space bar? Okay. So, okay. So, I'm here in my capacity both as a parent and as the founder of Courageous Parents Network, which I will explain in a moment. I have nothing to disclose. I never, sadly, have anything to disclose. My story began in 1999 when my nephew there in the lower red was diagnosed at the age of 18 months with Tay-Sachs disease, which is still, infantile Tay-Sachs, a rare genetic disorder that is still sadly incurable and untreatable. And children with Tay-Sachs, infantile Tay-Sachs, always die in early childhood. Hayden's father is my husband's identical twin who married my roommate from college. So those are the four parents standing there. And at the time of Hayden's diagnosis, I had this sickening feeling that maybe there was something wrong with my daughter, Cameron, my second daughter, who at the time was 5 months, simply because she still had a very strong startle response. So at 5 months, we went and were tested, and it turned out that Cameron, too, my second daughter, had infantile Tay-Sachs. So we were four parents with two children in one family being asked to do the impossible. And this is very, from a genetic standpoint, very statistically improbable, but I think it really made everything possible. Most immediately, a year and a half later, my husband was with his brother at his nephew's bedside in New York City. Hayden was actively dying, and I was home with Cameron, completely terrified. I was pregnant with our third daughter, and I was terrified for my brother and sister-in-law, who I knew had to watch within days their son die, and they had to let him go. And I knew that this was my future soon enough. And I have a visceral memory of that moment where I felt like I was glass and I was just going to shatter. And in that exact moment, my husband called, and he told me that things in the apartment were peaceful, that Hayden was comfortable, that Tim and Allison, my brother and sister-in-law, were okay, and that we were going to be okay. And with that one call, the worst of my anxiety and dread dissipated, and I was able to live and breathe into the last 5 months of my daughter's life. And we were okay. We really were okay. And I think we were okay for 3 reasons. First and foremost, we had the fellowship of my brother and sister-in-law. We traveled together. We walked that road together. Hayden was a year older than my daughter, Cameron, and so my brother and sister-in-law really led the way in terms of the things that were happening. We were able to learn from some of the things that happened with Hayden that we learned we didn't want for Cameron, specifically hospitalization. Children with infantile Tay-Sachs have a horrible time with noises and with their startle response. And Hayden's first hospitalization from pneumonia taught us that with every possible way, every time Cameron got a pneumonia, we were going to try to treat that at home. And fortunately, that was made possible by the amazing primary care doctor we had, a community-based pediatrician who practiced pediatric palliative care every step of the way. At the time, pediatric palliative care wasn't even really a field, but he did it. And interestingly, he is now a full-time palliative care doctor at Boston Children's in Dana-Farber. So he left primary care to practice palliative medicine. And I'm particularly moved selfishly because he said that my daughter Cameron was the midwife of his career change. So I sort of love that. His name is Richard Goldstein, if you ever have opportunity to meet him at Dana-Farber or Children's. And I know that Steve and Sarah had an amazing primary care doctor for Emerson who practiced palliative medicine. And really, I cannot stress the importance of frontline primary care doctors bringing so much of the tenets of palliative medicine to their practice, even though they're not specialized. And third, we received grief counseling. All the way through my daughter's life. It was hard to find a good grief counselor. We had a few false starts, and they've become very funny stories. But when we finally found the grief counselor, who is not this woman, Dr. Nancy from Restyron, but she'll make sense in a moment. Her name is Dr. Laura Basile. She now lives in Cornwall. And if you have met her, I bet some of you have met her. She's extraordinary. She worked very closely with children living with rare disease, life-threatening disease, and their parents. And we worked with her at the time she was in Boston, and she made an extraordinary difference and really helped my husband and me get through and learn about how we were coping differently and why we felt like we wanted to go like this when really we needed to be like this. And so I give her credit for helping us get through. So these were the 3 things that really helped us get through. Now, as you probably know, most families facing a situation like this do not have what we had. Most of them are isolated. They don't have a brother and sister-in-law leading the way, and they're isolated literally, physically in their homes, and they don't have people that they can turn to easily. Support groups are very hard to find, and a lot of these families don't want to leave their homes to go to them anyway. Support groups are also a little limited because you might have to listen to people you don't feel like listening to. You can't tell someone to shut up in a support group. Secondly, counseling, like the type of support we had, is hard to find, and as is pediatric palliative care. We were very lucky to have a primary care doctor who practiced palliative medicine, but at least today, people like our doctor and Dr. I don't even know, Meredith, your last name, there aren't enough frontline primary care doctors who are schooled in the tenets of good communication, shared decision-making, what it means to help a family identify their care goals and values and walk them through and transition to end of life. And So what I decided several, like 10 years later, was that I wanted to bring everything that had helped my husband and me get through to as many families going through this today. The number they say is about 400,000 children living with life-threatening illness in America alone. So that's, I wanted to see how we could get as much of what helped us virtually to families today. And that was the seed for Courageous Parents Network. Courageous Parents Network is a web and mobile platform to empower and support parents caring for children with serious illness, as well as the providers who are supporting these families. It is designed to augment the direct service that families are getting. It is not designed in lieu of course, there is nothing like direct service. But there are gaps, and including the community, and to help meet the isolation that families experience. And we live in an age where with web and mobile and digital media such as videos, which are the centerpiece of Courageous Parents Network, we can really fill some of those gaps. So the Courageous Parents Network brings parents into virtual community with each other through videos, podcasts, a blog, a private discussion forum. Our videos, we'll get into the parents in a minute. Our videos also provide professional guidance. We feature palliative care doctors, nurse, grief counselor, chaplain, talking about the issues that parents, talking to and about the issues that parents experience, and it's designed to really scaffold and validate the parent experience and normalize what they're going through. All of our content, where appropriate, promotes the value of pediatric palliative care. That is our only editorial agenda, is to promote palliative care, so parents know what it is and to seek it out, and if they're referred to it, they understand that we're not talking about hospice and end of life. We're talking about that extra layer of support that helps you get through. And because we are web and mobile, at no cost, we are available 24/7 wherever and whenever parents need us, so long as they have access to the internet. And we know that parents have been finding us particularly helpful in the middle of the night when they wake up and all the scary questions come lurking in, because parents always have scary questions, even if they're not voicing them aloud to you, they're thinking them. So now mom or dad can pop up in the middle of the night and go to the computer and hear from parents who have gone before and get some guidance. All of our content it's organized in a number of different ways, so parents can come in a different way. They can come in based on where they are in their child's illness journey, newly diagnosed, or questions about caring for self and family, or decision-making, anticipating end of life, or bereavement and legacy. What we know is that some parents upon diagnosis only are thinking about where they are in that moment. A lot of parents, although they might not tell you, are also leaping ahead to, what if my child dies? Can I do this? So they might be asking questions about bereavement, or what does end of life look like? Will I be able to do this? I have absolutely no idea who I can even ask that question of. None of my friends have had children who have died. I'm afraid if I ask my primary care doctor about end of life, they're going to think that I'm already writing my child off. These are the things that parents think. So they don't have to ask anybody. They can just go pop online and listen to some parent videos talking about it. Content is organized by themes. So, for example, under a new diagnosis, they can hear from parents and providers talking about the beginning, worries and losses, finding support, issues of control, tips for working with the medical team and identifying goals of care, what to do when it's a long, indefinite timeline, issues of faith and spirituality. If they're interested in end of life, they can hear from parents talking about how they talk to their child about what their child wanted for end of life, fear of regret, which is a big, big issue for parents, anticipating being bereaved, what does end of life look like, what will it be like for me after my child dies, and how do I even think about my child's legacy after they've died. So those are some of the topics. We are also organized, if parents come in and think about themselves as, I want to hear from a parent whose child has what my child has. These are the conditions, the diagnoses that we currently have, and we're adding all the time by interviewing families whose children are living with or have died from a particular disease. We'll hopefully be adding Gaucher, but these are some of the diseases we currently feature. I should say all of our content, we do not talk about research or treatment. We're only focusing on the psychosocial and emotional landscape of caring for a child with a serious disease. So we're not like patients like me dealing with experimental trials or anything like that. But we do know that families identify based on what their child is living with. So we want them to be able to hear from parents whose children have that in the event that as a way in. And we also organize our content based on the providers in the videos. So we feature a palliative care doctor, chaplain, social worker, nurse, grief counselor, psychologist. So if you as a parent or you as a professional colleague want to go hear how a chaplain talks and thinks about these things, you can go in and listen to a particular doctor or nurse or social worker or chaplain. We also have downloadable guides that have come through all of the work that we've done with our content director and our other professional advisory board members who are doctors, nurses, social workers. And currently our guides are around helping siblings cope, taking care of the marriage, self-care, and understanding what anticipatory grief is. All of these are downloadable for you to share with your families if that seems like something that would be helpful to them. And we also have just pages related to issues such as medical orders, understanding medical orders, decision-making around medical interventions like tracheostomies, and advanced care planning. And we got this from Dr. Pat O'Malley at Mass General Hospital for Children, who adapted it from the serious illness checklist that Dr. Gawande and Dr. Block did at Ariadne Labs. So, of course, all of these are things that we hope and think parents would be doing with their child's primary medical team, but sometimes parents might not be getting that or might want to get out ahead of that, and here's a tool for them to start thinking about what matters to them. You know, what do I worry about? What are my fears? What do I hope for? What would I consider acceptable or not acceptable? As I said, our video library consists of parents of all shapes, sizes, statuses as regards married, not married, divorced, and some of them are bereaved and some of them are currently caring for their children. And here I'm going to show a video which is this gives you a snapshot of the types of content. It features the grief counselor, who we have a lot of content, videos of our grief counselor, the psychologist, who was referred to us by Laura Basili, and one of our parents. So this is just one of the videos.
You know, you may know right from the beginning that there's going to be an end to this life. And sometimes you don't know that at the beginning at a diagnosis, and it becomes clear over time. And you might have thought about it a lot right from the beginning, even if you don't know the outcome. And there comes a time when there's a different kind of both cognitive and emotional recognition that really this isn't going to be curative, that really this child is going to die. And it doesn't mean you give up hope. It doesn't mean you don't go back and forth with hope and fear constantly, the hope that I'm wrong and this is going to be fine, or the fear that this really, really is going to happen and I don't know what it's going to look like and I don't know when. But there's a shift, I think, that happens emotionally, even as you're not necessarily giving up hope, where there's a sense of we're no longer really in a curative mode. And that you begin to transition, I think, not all the time, but some of the time, to a different way of thinking. You might, for some, it's a little bit more of a focus on how the child is going to die. It may be a little bit more intense awareness of time. You know, when is this going to happen? Or I don't have as much time, or I need to make the most of whatever, moments that I have.
I think that those last few months of treatment when we were doing therapy at home, it was very difficult. I think at that point I was spending a lot of time in my head preparing that this was not going to end well and that it was not going to be long, that I could see that he was dying at that point. At that point we were spending less time at the hospital, but we had a great team of people coming into the house through early intervention and palliative care and VNA. And at that point, those people were everything to us, and especially the VNA nurses and the palliative care people, because they really understood that I knew we were on the other side of this, and they acknowledged that and they supported that in a way that I think his medical team couldn't do at that point, because they were still treating him. And it was, the whole time it was, and I saw it the whole time. But at what point do I take a stand and say enough is enough? And these people were in our home every week, and they listened to everything I had to say. And they, more than anything, just said, I see what you're seeing. And that's it. And that was enough for me. Because when the doctors see him once a week, sure, they see things, but these people were in our home. They saw his quality of life. They saw that he couldn't feed himself. They saw that he was in pain at home in his environment, and that's not acceptable. And they acknowledged that what I was seeing was real.
So that's just, that's an example of the video content we have. There are over 300 videos on the site. They are currently all in English. It is a dream of mine in a year or two, when we've figured everything out in English, to do a version of this in different languages, and not with not with subtitles, but start interviewing families living, Spanish-speaking families and, Haitian families, and just have their, different language versions of this. But I would have to raise a lot more money to do that. So here, what are we learning? We are learning the importance of naming things. For example, when parents come onto our site and they learn about anticipatory grief, this is the thing this has been the hottest thing, is parents who come on and learn about that this thing that they're going through is called anticipatory grief. And I know it's very important not to pathologize things, but giving things a name is not pathologizing it. And when you tell them, oh yes, this is this anger, this distress, this grief, even though your child is still alive, that's called, you're grieving. Your child doesn't have to be dead to grieve. Parents are very liberated by learning that what they're going through has a name. And it, quote, I love this, it relieves the burden to change that which cannot be changed. Here's this email from a mom. I'm so glad I found your group. I have all these mixed feelings about my child and the future. I saw a few of your videos, and there I learned about anticipatory grief, and it was comfortable to learn that what I'm feeling is a normal thing. We also are, this was unanticipated but very exciting, is that Courageous Parents Network, our videos, the parent voices, have application for professional medical education. Our videos are an opportunity for providers, such as yourselves, to spend time hearing more of the parent experience. Oftentimes, if you are only seeing a family in the hospital in a crisis situation, you don't have an opportunity to ask them questions, the time, or the opportunity to hear about the rest of their world. And our parent videos cover marriage, how parents think about their other children, how they think about spiritual issues, what their fears and anxieties are, how they've been disappointed by their extended family or not, where they find support, and how family can help them. So our videos are available to help you go deeper on any of those things, and they have been incorporated into a continuing medical education course on end of life in pediatrics, which you can find and take if it's of interest to you. And Dr. O'Malley, who is on our professional advisory board, uses it. She refers families to Courageous Parents Network as a way of prompting difficult conversations. If you have a family who you know is who's wrestling with things like issues around spinal surgery or a feeding tube or tracheostomy, or is beginning to think about, ooh, what if this doesn't go well? As a way of initiating that difficult conversation, you can encourage them to go watch some videos of other parents talking about this, which might give them ideas, either something like, I loved that or I hated that. That's something for them to push against, which can really help them find their own way, what it is they want for themselves. It also is a way of depersonalizing it. So by talking about another family's choice, you're not forcing them to talk about what they want in that moment. What do you think about what that mother said about blah? Takes the pressure off of the parent and gives them a way to come to it with you. And now I will hand it over to Sarah, who is featured here with her daughter, Emerson. Thank you.
So a lot of the things that Blyth already covered, I think, were actually very true for us, and we actually talked about this a little bit, about some of our parallels in our experiences. So as many of you know, my daughter Emerson Shaw died on June 10th, 2016 from type 2 Gaucher's disease. And it's really an honor to be here, to be able to tell her story, and to be able to share a little bit about how Courageous Parents Network and how palliative care helped us along her journey. And we hope that, excuse me, that it will be helpful to you in the work that you do with other families. So I want to start off with a little bit of background about Emerson and what led up to her diagnosis, and then talk a little bit about how we found Courageous Parents Network and how for us it wasn't really a standalone resource, but it was rather incorporated into the bigger picture of palliative care. So Emerson was born on February 10th, 2015 in Seattle after a normal, healthy pregnancy. And for the first 6 months of her life, she was completely nothing but the picture of health. She was in the 95th percentile for height and weight. She was ahead of the curve on all developmental milestones. Steve and I used to joke that we had to be careful around other parents because nobody likes to show off, and she was so advanced and so far beyond their children. And so, for the first 7 months, or 6 months, everything really seemed pretty great. When she was 7 months old, we moved to Vermont. And around that time, we started noticing that she wasn't quite keeping up with her developmental milestones and that her growth had slowed considerably. And then one day, one of her eyes started turning in, and she didn't want to put weight on her feet. And these were all very strange things for her. And so we had made an appointment to see Dr. Monahan, Meredith, for her 9-month checkup, and I called and had that moved up because we were really concerned about her. So at that first meeting, she felt what she believed was a mass in Emerson's abdomen. It turned out later to be a very enlarged spleen, but there was no way to know really what it was at the time. So we went from her office immediately to the hospital and were admitted. After multiple days in the hospital with having lots of tests, and then probably a week, maybe week and a half, it's all very hazy, of waiting at home for test results, Emerson was finally diagnosed at 8 months old with type 2 Gaucher's disease, which is a very rare genetic disorder. There's no treatment or cure. And in very basic terms, children that have this disorder are missing a specific enzyme that results in the buildup of certain fatty substances in various organs. And in Emerson's case, that was her spleen and liver and brain. It's progressive, and it's always fatal within the first few years of life, usually by age 2. Emerson, due to the extensive neurologic damage, and she died when she was 16 months old. So we were referred by Dr. Burke here to Dr. Olaf Bodemer, who some of you may have seen. He presented a while back here at Boston Children's Hospital. And he gave us the final diagnosis, and he spent a lot of time discussing it with us. We talked about her prognosis, the progression of the disease, and some of the decisions that would have to be made along the way regarding interventions. And then we talked a lot about quality versus quantity of life. And really right from the start, my husband Steve, Emerson's father, and I were thankfully on the same page that for us, quality was much more important than quantity. And I don't think that we knew, I know that we didn't know at that time what that meant or how that was going to really play out, but we knew that that's really, as our foundation, what we believed. So we decided to move forward with enzyme replacement therapy. And while the enzymes wouldn't be able to cross the blood-brain barrier, so they would not change her prognosis or affect any of her neurologic symptoms, they would be able to shrink her spleen and liver back to a normal size, which would make her more comfortable and we felt improve her quality of life. And we think that that was true. And because she'd be getting infusions every week, she had to have a port surgically placed. So it was while we were at Boston Children's Hospital for that surgery that we were introduced to Courageous Parents Network. A social worker and a doctor from their PAC team came and talked with us. And if, as you can imagine at this point, our world was completely and utterly shattered and in a way that there aren't really words for. And all we could think of was that she was going to die, and how could we ensure that this was as painless as possible? This was our first visit with specialized palliative care providers. So when they started asking us about our hopes for Emerson's life, I was initially pretty kind of confused by that because it didn't seem like a situation that there was any hope. So we could only really articulate our hopes for how she might have a good death, and that's all we could really at that point think of. We also talked a lot about just how utterly and completely alone and isolated we felt. You know, Blyth talked a little bit about that. And, you know, as parents, you want to connect with other parents whose children are going through similar things as yours or similar stages. And when you have a terminally ill baby with a rare genetic condition, there's just not really, it's not easy to find people to connect to. So they recommended that we check out Courageous Parents Network. And I have to say I was initially a little unsure. Everything was very raw. I felt very vulnerable. And I told them I just was not interested in joining an online support group. It just was not going to be for me. And so they explained to me that that's not what this was and that it was different. You didn't have to join. You didn't have to participate if you didn't want to. That you could just watch the parent and caregiver videos. You could read the blog and you could access information. And they even went so far as to talk a little bit about Blyth and talk about how she made sure that she was very diligent about the high quality of the content, and they went on about that. They really, really sold it, because I was not so sure about it. But I'm very just so thankful that they did. We went home and we checked out the site, and I would say that the biggest thing for us right away was that it made us feel so much less alone. In watching the videos, I felt for the first time that there are other people out there who had gone through things that we were going through and that could understand what we were feeling. And it really was really, really helpful to hear other parents articulate things that we just didn't have the words for yet. And an example of this that I put this in before I even saw Blyth's presentation. An example of this was anticipatory grief. I'd never heard the term before, but as I listened to the parents talking, I kept thinking, you know, that's exactly what I'm feeling. You know, you're looking at your happy, babbling, playful 8-month-old, but you're grieving her death and all of the losses that will come before and after that. And you're grieving things that haven't happened yet. And it can be really scary and really disorienting. So learning about anticipatory grief, it just gave me some context for those feelings and allowed me to process them in a way that felt sane. Because a lot of things didn't at the time. We also, through the site, did learn what pediatric palliative care really was, and that it wasn't just about a good death, but that it was really about living well. And so I decided that we needed more of this. We needed this in our lives. And so I still didn't really understand fully what that would look like. I don't think I still fully understood what it was, but I just knew that I was desperate for extra support. And a friend of mine who was from here and had lost a child, I was telling her about this, and she said, you know, you really need to meet Dr. McCauley, because she had worked with him. And so the next time I went to Dr. Monahan's office, I told her we wanted to be connected with Dr. McCauley, and this was still very early on. And so she kind of looked at me and asked me if I understood what he did, and I said yes, and I really didn't. I didn't know it all, but I just knew that we needed to be connected with him. So I said yes, of course, and I knew it had to do with, you know, we knew Emerson's prognosis. Anyway, so Dr. McCauley and Dr. Monahan came out to our house to meet with us. And I just want to pause here just for a minute to say that I think that was one of the first examples, and Blyth already talked a little bit about this, but examples that, or illustrations of that, well, Dr. Monahan was Emerson's primary care pediatrician. She really was our primary palliative care pediatrician. She helped us coordinate all aspects of Emerson's care. She was our point person from day one. She was available pretty much 24/7, which we tried really hard not to take too much advantage of. She set Steve and I up with a counselor that was so helpful in processing, like Blyth was saying, just our different ways of dealing, our different ways of reacting, and I feel like we really did stay together through all of this. And she really spent time getting to know us and getting to know Emerson and build a trusting relationship so that when we had to make really difficult decisions, she could support us in a very professional but also very, very personal way, which made a huge difference. And so to have her there during that first meeting with Dr. McCauley was just really wonderful. It was during this meeting that I think things really began to shift for me. We talked about quality of life and what we felt that meant for Emerson. We talked about interventions that we might need to make choices about, such as, you know, feeding tubes, trachs, treating pneumonias, seizure medications, and the delicate balance between helping Emerson live as long as possible, knowing that no matter what we did, it was going to be short, while also maintaining quality of life in the way that we defined it. It's very different for different people. And then Dr. McCauley asked us about our hopes for Emerson's life. And my initial thought was like, oh, this is a thing with like palliative care people. But the thing is that it did make me think back to that meeting in Boston and how we had been asked that same question, but how this time it just felt so incredibly different. Having spent time watching the videos and reading the blog posts on Courageous Parents Network, I started to see how other parents had found hope in the face of their children's serious illness and even in their death. And we started to believe a little bit that maybe we could do that too. There's a really fantastic book about grief by Tom Zuba called Permission to Mourn, and it was actually sent to us by the PACT team from Boston Children's Hospital after Emerson died. He has a pretty incredible story. He lost his daughter, his wife, and his son to 3 different illnesses over a number of years. And in the book, he talks about praying for miracles, and how over time he's come to believe that a miracle is simply, quote, a shift in perception. That simple, that profound. And I think for us, that's really what happened. We had a shift in our perception and what it meant to have hopes and dreams for Emerson. And at this point, we truly started embracing her life and her just as it was, just as she was. And I wish I could say, and that was that, and we embraced life, and everything was great. And to some extent, you know, that is true. Emerson lived such a full, happy, joy-filled life, and Steve and I were able to be full participants in it. But it was still really, really, really hard. As her disease progressed, she had more complications that led to a handful of extended hospital stays. And while on the one hand, no one wants to have their child in the hospital, on the other hand, it was during those stays that, in addition to Dr. McCauley, we also got to know the other members of the palliative care team, Laurel Audie and Dr. Barnard. And our whole family was so well taken care of by them as well as by everyone else at the hospital. I see a lot of familiar faces who that applies to. The being there became a bit of a reprieve for us, really. During the times that something was going on with Emerson, like a respiratory illness or high fevers or seizure-like activity, being in the hospital gave us a little bit of room to breathe, knowing that, for lack of better words, that we didn't have to be in charge. that if something happened, a team of people that really knew us, that knew Emerson, and that we completely trusted were there to help us. Steve and I will often joke that we slept better in those hospital chairs than we ever did at home, which is a little sad but true. And people brought us food. There was it was kind of, it sounds crazy, but it was definitely a little bit of respite for us in a time where it was really difficult. And at the same time, what I would call our sort of relationship with Courageous Parents Network was also growing. We were looking further into the site, looking, what I would say, deeper into the site at things that I might have been too afraid to look at before. I just didn't want to hear about, I didn't want to think about. And we're starting to really look further into what different experiences parents had as their children's life went on. And we had decided that if and when it came to it, we did not want Emerson to have a tracheostomy, just based on her personal situation and prognosis, and we thought a lot about it. And when we felt like this was the right decision, it was still really, really, really hard as a parent. I think when there's any sort of intervention, even if you know it's not going to change the prognosis, to say that you're not going to do it, it's just a hard thing, and I did struggle with it. And I'm so grateful that not only did we have a trusted medical team here, that we could talk through this, and with Meredith, that we could talk through this over and over and over again, but also that through Courageous Parents Network, I could hear parent perspectives on this. And I appreciated that multiple perspectives were represented. I think it helped to clarify for me in a very human way that as parents of children with life-limiting illness, that we're all just doing the very best that we can in our particular situation in the face of something that's unimaginably difficult, and that there isn't really one right way to do it, and that you just have to do what's best for you and your family and your child. And I believe that the support that we got from palliative care and from Courageous Parents Network, and from the two combined, I feel like that really allowed us to do that, and allowed us to be the best parents that we could be for Emerson, and to really be the parents that she deserved. So while we miss her a lot, I almost made it. We really don't have any regrets about the way that she lived or the way that she died. And I think that brings us a tremendous amount of peace in the difficult days after. And continual. And we've been just so grateful that even after her death, many of the relationships that we formed throughout her journey with this illness have continued and continue to bring us comfort and bring us strength as we go on this sort of next phase. And Courageous Parents Network does that too. They have sections on bereavement, and you can hear parents talk about that experience. And so we're just grateful for palliative care, for Courageous Parents, and for the way that it allowed us to help our daughter to live the best life that she could, and to help us really not just survive this situation and survive the experience, but really to thrive in it. And so thank you so much for being here and listening to our story and being part of Emerson's story, and thank you.
So I'm loath to go away from this picture. The one on the right is my most favorite ever. When Sarah sent it to me, I burst into tears. We're not. So that's some contact information. But there is a handout in the back. So I encourage you to take a handout in the back, and we're at courageousparentsnetwork.org. But let's go back to this much better picture, and we have some time for questions.
I'm going to try to pull it together too here, but it's just wonderful and phenomenal support that you described receiving. But could you talk about, Blyth, maybe some experiences of barriers for not getting that type of emotional support that families can face?
So are you asking what do I think the barriers are, or how do families experience it when there are barriers?
The first, what barriers are there?
I think there are a number of barriers. In no particular order. I think that primary care, there's a lack of education for primary care doctors in how to do this work and have difficult conversations and do the shared decision making. Unless you're a specialist in oncology, and even then, most parents don't go into most people don't go into pediatrics to help parents help their children live a short and beautiful life. So there's a lack of training, and there's an understandable lack of preparedness and a reluctance to do that work because it's very upsetting to do this work. So a lot of providers lack the training and aren't necessarily feeling equipped to do it. So then you might have no conversation or a conversation that goes badly. And that's not helpful. And by the way, there's not one conversation. There are like 15 that happen again and again and again. There's a lack of training. There's a lack of money. A lot of these difficult things aren't currently compensated by insurers and Medicaid, so that's a problem. And there are organizations like the Center of Advanced Palliative Care that are working tirelessly at the policy level to try to change that. And we are seeing some shifts. Happily, especially in adult medicine, where insurers are now paying providers to have questions about end of life with their patient families. I think there's a lack of education in the community to know what palliative care is and how it can help. So parents don't know to ask for it. Like the fact that Sarah learned about palliative care also from Courageous Parents Network, and said, I need Bob. Like, that to me is like, yay! Now, she's lucky because there was a Bob. There isn't always a Bob, and that's a problem. And that's about training. Those are my immediate thoughts. Those are my immediate thoughts. And then there's community-based palliative care so that families can get the support they need at home, where many of them want to be or have to be because their children can't be chronically hospitalized, or they don't want them to be chronically hospitalized. So then that's about the community resources. And in a rural state like Vermont, that can be especially challenging, getting child life and a social worker and a nurse into the homes. That's a resource restriction. And again, money and people. Yay. Such easy problems to fix.
With all the parents that you work with, have you come across many stories about palliative care being introduced prematurely or poorly? And what takeaways do you have for providers from those parents?
So I've come across stories where I've come across three types. The family where it was introduced in a timely fashion, and they, like us, where it was like, oh my God, thank God. The families for whom it was introduced way too late, and they are really upset that they didn't get it much earlier, and I'm going to say, just go out on a limb and say that's often cancer families. That's the theme I see in all of the people who are like, why didn't I know about this sooner? I can't believe I didn't know about this sooner. So those are the too late ones where it made a difference, but they wish they'd known about it sooner. And then there are the families who said, yeah, palliative care came into my hospital room, and I was like, I'm not ready for you, go away. And then months later, palliative care comes back and help them, and they're like, oh my God, why didn't I let them come in the first time? So it's never, if you can get through the first obstacle of, my child's not dying right now, why are you here? Which is the misunderstanding that families have about what palliative care is. If you can get them over that hurdle, I think it's never too early when you have a life-threatening diagnosis to introduce palliative care.
And I would say that for us, just understanding what palliative care is, and that it's not the same as hospice, because we knew that Emerson was not going to live. Maybe she could. Dr. Bottomer said, I think maybe till 3 would be the latest, and if, with more interventions. But we knew her prognosis, but we weren't ready for hospice. And so just, I think initially I thought palliative care, hospice, same thing. And I think that in Boston, when they came and talked to us, we weren't resistant to them talking to us because I just wanted anyone that would talk with me about Emerson and what was going on. But the idea of palliative care, until I kind of learned more about it, felt like it was the same as hospice, and that just meant getting ready for death. And so I think that there, as a parent, just there's a lack of understanding of what it is and how it differs from hospice.
And we're trying to change that, as are people in this room. Back there.
Wonderful. We lost a son 15 oops, I'm sorry. My name is Dwayne Williams. We lost a son 15 years ago from a brain tumor, and this is just a suggestion. We didn't have this, but we had the community. We could never have gone through it without the friends and family, to get us through it. But this is just a suggestion. But siblings, and I talked to a lot of people, and I think they get lost. How do you deal with the siblings? And we have a daughter, she was 9, Jared was 13. But you look for those red flags, whether it's within the school, friends, family, whatever. But it's just a suggestion that, to me, that should be really highlighted, throughout the care. And, all the attention's on the parents and the child that's ill. But that young, daughter or son that's down in the playroom, it's just a suggestion.
Well, it's a profound suggestion, and because we have heard this from others, we do have a whole section on siblings.
And I saw that.
Where it's parents talking about how they take care of the siblings, think about the siblings, providers, and also we have siblings talking about it too. Okay. So thank you, because that is like that's almost the first thing that everybody says is after how do you help the parents get through is how do you help the siblings get through.
Well, I certainly want to thank Sarah and Blyth for sharing your stories and for introducing us and making us even more aware of the Courageous Parents Network. And thanks to what we all do together to help our children.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll take a 5-minute break, and there'll be a pediatric staff meeting in about 5 minutes. Thank you both so much.
Oh my God, you did a good job. You did such a good job.
Good.
We trained Meredith too. We need him to train everyone.
So this just raising so but it's so nice you can just see from that standpoint.
Yeah, what this is. Yeah.
But I see them both like
Yeah. Oh, of course, because of pediatrics. Yeah. No.
Thank you for coming.
Hold on one second.
Thank you so much. You're very welcome.
It's a great
Yeah, and the fact.
Yeah.
It's like, look at it or not. You know what I mean? And at your own pace. And without people asking questions or if like someone's like she was saying about if someone's doing something that you don't want to do, switch the video. Exactly. Not humor them. Yeah.
So Mary and Sarah.
I just thought
Dr.
you should know
First,
that.
thank you.
Okay.
So
We
I mean,
just got the first article due this month.
Okay.
My son unexpected.
Okay.
I really want to just chat.
I would love to chat. Is it easy to find you?
Yeah, very easy to find. That we never write stuff.
Okay.
It's very nice.
Thank you, Dr. First. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to be calling Rick this afternoon. Because I mean, I've heard of you, but I've never met you.
we have a problem, okay?
Okay, thank you, Dr. First. Hi,
Thank you
Ross.
again.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for that. So I'm a third year pediatric resident. I'm actually doing this here.
Was it here?
Yeah.
No,
But then I practiced.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right.
right, okay.
I wanted to make sure it was going to be the right length.
And then in undergrad, I did a lot of reading things with
for 2 hours.
great parents.
You know, but then it's
about losing your child and how some things that I think I did. And so many of them talk about actually only people who really have
The one on the left actually is
that how nothing can really can't be really be forced on people. And I think for courageous parents is that exactly taking the stories from people who are
good. I'm actually
and just having it there available.
Yeah, is your meeting in
when you're
here?
able and ready.
Yes, the next one is yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for telling me that. Thank you for telling me to go into
This is important.
Oh my God. Thank you. I hope you have a fabulous residency. A fellowship, I should say. I hope, really, you're going to be
this
part
out
of
and
the
try and play with it.
More people knowing, trained. Thank you. What drove you, what made you decide to do palliative?
It's a long story, but just I felt like it was a need in pediatrics. You know, it'd been established in the adult world that their kid needs.